So the next presenter we have is Shelly. So Shelly inspired me. She was at the last summer's education program, and she inspired me in the composting method that she uses, and I've been using it quite successfully in my garden for about a year now. So Shelly, over to you.
Okay, hello.
Hello.
Can the slide come up?
There you go. So there's your first picture. So you just tell me, you have lots of pictures. So you just tell me next, 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 and I'll go through them.
Okay, I will. This is a picture of the front of my garden. I have three trenches dug in there. One in the front, one in the back, and one to the left. And my point for showing this picture is to show that even though the trenches are there, it can't see a thing. Next. Okay, so here is one of the trenches. During the summer months, I usually leave them uncovered. So as I'm working around the garden, I just toss whatever I'm pruning in there. But I'm not usually putting down anything that I'm bringing from home in those places. I reserve the peels for I save the peels from bananas, mangoes, and vegetables, whatever it is that we're eating at home, to compost directly around the plants that I use. Next slide, please. Okay, now I also have things in my garden that grow that are kind of thorny. So one of the ways that I try to deter varmints from coming around the areas where I have thrown down compost is if I'm pruning those things, and this is like holly, after I finish composting and putting my rocks back on top, I throw the little holly or whatever is that's thorny on top of it or around it, and that prevents the squirrels from coming around. Next slide. So in this particular case, I'm showing the stuff that I'm throwing around into the trench there. So these are the prunings that I did today. I took these pictures today and I was pruning around various areas. I forgot exactly what I cut, but that's green matter now. So before I threw this down last fall, when I was cutting things like bushes and trees, I kept all the woody stuff and I threw that down into the trench before I covered it up for the winter. So now I've uncovered it. My brown matter is there, and now I'm going to be putting green matter over it all summer long. So Janet was asking about cold composting, right? Cold composting is what I do. So as you can see, this green matter may have seeds in it or whatever in there as well. But since I have a dedicated area, the trenches to throw them in, if the weeds or the seed starts to sprout up, I can see immediately that they are doing that. I can pull them up or cut them down. I have rocks all around my garden. I can put those sproutings on top of the rocks, let the sun beat down on them for a week and cook them, and then throw them back into the trench. Next. So I also use my trench as a pathway. I don't have a lot of room in my garden because it's all filled up with plants, but I do need a pathway to walk from one side of the garden to the other. So I just walk on top of those trenches, and that helps to push all the composting down and make room for next week's composting material. And I never bothered to turn this. I just leave it the way it is.
Mhm.
And over time, it does become compost. And I've noticed that the plants that are growing on either side of the trench have spread their roots into the trench. And so they are very well composted and happy. Next. Okay, so this
Remember to
one.
mute, please, if you're not speaking. Thank you. Go ahead, Shelly.
All right, so this one just shows a picture of what I do in the winter. When I'm ready to close the compost pile for the season, I put down bricks right on top. And that'll keep everything down for the winter, and until it gets really cold and nothing's really composting, they're going to be composting all throughout that time. And then in the spring, right, if I feel like I want to dig something up, I will take the bricks off and check around to see what has composted, dig up the soil around that area, and then move it to wherever it is in the garden that I want to put it. Next slide. Okay, this is the kind of stuff that I bring from home. On the right-hand side are carrot peelings and cucumber peelings and other kinds of peelings. And then on the left side, I have some leftover hot dog buns, lots of tea bags, and many, many banana peels and apple cores are in there. Next slide. So here's a picture of what I do. Around this rock, I want chrysanthemums to start growing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift this rock. Next picture. And once lifted, you can see, you know, where those bright lights are. That's the soil. It's all flattened out. I don't bother to turn it or anything. Next slide. I just throw my compost on top of it. So here the compost is like a couple of tea bags, some peelings. Underneath will be some banana peels, and that's it. And then the next thing I'm going to do, next slide, is just to put the rock right back on top of it, and that's it. And then these pictures coming up are the things that I get out of this garden. So my Japanese maples, next slide, clematis. This clematis, because of the way I've been composting, the clematis have been getting bigger and bigger every year. This one is now bigger than 1.5 of my hands put together. Next.
Wow.
Yep. That's one. It's called Henry. Next slide. Geraniums. Next slide. I'm not sure what these are called, but somebody gave me some of those at one point, and now
Tradescantia.
Yes, they're very pretty. There are also white ones too, but these are purple. Next slide. And these roses. Okay, I have a little story to tell you about these roses. This rose actually is on the north side of the garden in the common landscape area. And several years ago, when the landscape committee, of which I was a member and still would be a member if we were doing things there, we pruned that bush. And when we were pruning it, one of the gardeners told me that this is a very, very old rose, and she didn't think that we could ever be able to buy it again. So that if something were to happen to it, you know, that would be the end of it. So I took a 6-inch piece of the cutting and I stuck it into the soil in my garden, and that's all I did. And now it's blooming like this. Next slide. And this slide, you can sort of see it in the back. It has grown into a huge bush with like many, many, many blooms. so many blooms that it's actually blooming into my neighbor's garden. So today when I saw my neighbor, I said to him, if you like those roses, then cut them and take them home. Next slide. And that's a picture of a different clematis. This one is a duchess of some sort. I forgot the exact which duchess it is. But when I first planted it, the blooms were very, very small. But now they have gotten to be about as big as my hand each. Next. And that's just another clematis that's growing along. I think that's it, right? Oh yes, lavender and some lavender. And I think that's the last slide.
Yep, you're right.
Okay.
Your garden is lovely, and it's amazing to see how, you know, as you're feeding the soil with all of the organic matter, how huge your plants are getting and how beautiful your flowers are getting. And and I like your method because it's like a lazy method. It's not a lot of work.
Yes, I am a very lazy composter, I'm afraid. And I also want to say that there's about worm bins. I've found over the years that the best worm bin is really the garden. As I've been composting around from plant to plant, right? The number of earthworms that are in the garden went from like just one or two to probably hundreds now all over the place. If I ever do dig into the soil, I can always find like, I don't know, 5, 6. One time I even counted 10 earthworms crawling around out when I did that. And lots of little beneficial bugs that are also digesting the compost and whatever. So, you know, the thing is, you know, the earthworms are moving around in the soil and they're digging through the soil. So I feel like I don't need to till or anything. They're doing all the work for me.
Excellent. Does anybody have any questions for Shelly?
Yes, Shelly, wonderful talk. Thank you. How deep is the trench? I couldn't tell from the photos.
Right. I went as deep as I could until I couldn't go anymore. I'll put it that way. So okay. I don't know how deep the soil is in your garden, but you know, you can dig it until you can't go any further and then leave it at that. And then once, if you do have like wooden sticks, you know, like when you're pruning your bushes or your trees, then, you know, it's very rare that I bring anything over to Anthony's pile, because what I'm doing is I'm throwing the big things into the trench, knowing that it will take a long time for it to decompose, but I don't care because I'm using that as my bottom layer for brown matter. And then all throughout the summer, I'm throwing green matter on. And then in the fall, if I'm pruning the bushes or the trees again, more brown. That's the last layer of brown matter. And then the bricks go on top of it just to weigh it down.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? On the there's also in the chat that, you know, questions about maybe apps for beneficial insects. So Jack, you've been challenged with finding some apps about beneficial insects. Awesome. So our